So it's hard to know what we're gonna get anytime a Persona spin-off is released. Not only does Atlus experiment with a ton of different gameplay genres and art styles across these entries, but we also never know how the story is gonna pan out. Will the main cast get more development? Or will the focus only be on the new characters? And will the lore even be relevant in the end? By that, I'm referring to the whole "it was all a dream, oh no, mind wipe" sort of reputation these games have gotten over the years thanks to the Q games and P3 and 5 dancing. Meanwhile, entries like the Arena games are relevant sequels to P3 and P4. And so, this brings me to Persona 5 Strikers, a game I've wanted to talk about since my initial playthrough in 2021, but am only getting to now. So I get that it's almost 2024, guys, so over 7 years into the Persona 5 era, and unsurprisingly, tons of people are burned out from this entry. But as for me, I'm in a reminiscing mood, actually, in large part thanks to how much Tactica has unexpectedly vibed with me. And just a heads up, this video is sorta meant as a part 1, or a companion at least, to the video I'm making about Tactica and Toshiro. They'll be in the cards and description when it's done. But yeah, when it comes to Strikers, I'd like to take us all the way back to the OG release of P5 in 2016 and 17 and remind us of both what the game itself actually was like, as well as the fan reactions to it. You see, Strikers strikes me. Haha, get it? Strikes? Yeah. Okay, anyway, I see Strikers as maybe the biggest when Atlus listened moments. This interview with the development team in particular stating that from the get-go, this sequel was created by genuine fans for fans. So yeah, to me, it can't be a coincidence that the most common critiques of P5 I remember seeing in both the Japanese and overseas fan base just happen to be addressed in this spin-off sequel. So I'll be breaking down this when Atlus listened concept into 4 main components, and we'll bring up more tidbits from this interview as we go along. And I'll largely be singling out base Persona 5 in most of my points, and don't worry if you didn't play this first entry, I'll explain the relevant details as they come up. But yeah, I'm doing this for 2 main reasons. First is due to how Strikers and Royal were in development at the same time, so with that said, it sure would be hard to base a game on fan reaction and feedback when there isn't any yet, right? I have more to say about this later in the video, though something I do want to clarify before we move on here, there's nothing in Strikers that contradicts Royal's timeline, nor its additional events, so in other words, P5S is also just as much a sequel to P5R lore-wise. This leads me to the second major reason for base P5 though. So I'm genuinely really glad Persona got another huge influx of fans because of P5 Royal, and I myself love what Royal added and fixed. Example, you need not look any further than my Akechi video. But at the same time, since P5R was the first experience for so many, and also just how recency bias works out in general, I feel like a lot of the original understanding of P5, as in what was and wasn't in the game, has just kind of been lost and forgotten. The result of this is, at least to me, this underappreciation of just how hard Atlus cooked when it comes to Strikers, especially with P5R having already fixed a lot of the critiques people had of base P5, meaning some of what Strikers does so well is kinda just overlooked to the Royal-only crowd in my view. To be clear, this video wasn't meant to be some exhaustive analysis on Strikers' themes, story, and characters. Rather, I just hope this video can give all of us a better appreciation for this sequel. Now, let's get into the actual main topic. How Strikers, on a real-life meta scale, is Atlus's perfect gift to fans of Persona 5. So one of the biggest things I remember seeing all the time before Royal dropped was how the Phantom Thieves didn't feel like friends. Not every anonymous person on the internet elaborated on why, of course, but the gist I got was that players felt this way because the PT never got downtime to just enjoy themselves. Scenes that were meant to be bonding moments usually got cut short or were kinda overshadowed by the main plot's urgency. Some examples of these things were when they got rained out of the fireworks festival, or the whole Hawaii trip having the next big arc, the Okumura and Big Bang Burger thing always looming in the background. And I will return with more on a particular part of that arc a little later in this video, but to go back on topic, another example is how later, when the PT are supposed to be celebrating at the amusement park, that's when Haru horrifically sees her dad have a mental shutdown. So, all in all, there was this huge, and also I believe intentional, feeling that the PT just couldn't catch a break. By the way, this vibe is way more relevant to the base game than it is to Royal for a number of reasons. So to begin clarifying for maybe Royal-only players, P5R added quite a few group hangout scenes to ease this feeling, including the boys going to a summer festival together, for instance, and a number of holiday celebrations at the end of the year. Though something that especially stood out to me was how in original P5, there were none of those texts where your friends send these really sweet group photos to you. Seriously, big fat zero. These pictures did not exist in vanilla P5. I mean, there's a reason for the cliche, a picture is worth 1,000 words, guys. And some of these photos were taken during stressful times, like during the school festival, which kinda eased the tension of the moment compared to base P5. Now, this really resonates with me personally, since I can't help but be reminded of the amazing friends I was blessed to have in high school. You see, my mom was terminally ill and bedridden during my last couple years, and so at times there was a lot of stress at home because my dad and I were her caregivers at night. But in the midst of all of that, I'll never forget the kindness, generosity, and compassion of my friends who accommodated me and made sure there were fun things that would still fit my schedule. Even coming by to have a low-key hangout at my house if I couldn't make it out to a more boisterous meetup. My mom herself was also very grateful to them since, you know, she wanted good things for me and wished I could still have some fun. And one of my friends was like the on of the group. She always took pictures of everything. And now, nearly 10 years later, man, I can't believe how special that was. There's just something amazing about being able to recall the good memories even during the difficult times just by looking at some photos. And to remind myself, hey, I got through a lot, and even kind of encourage me nowadays when I'm feeling discouraged. And although I've fallen out of touch with these people many years back, I'll never forget and will always cherish having had them in my life. Especially since I'm well aware of the fact not everyone is fortunate to have a support system like that. They just truly made my high school time very special and eased a lot of my personal stress in those last few years. But school or not, do you guys have any super nostalgic memories from certain photos? I love to hear about these kinds of personal stories, so if you don't mind sharing, I'd love to hear in the comments. But segueing back on topic, another thing Royal added is every confidant giving you a call after each respective rank up to just provide some additional insight into their minds. And so when combined with the photos, these additions may appear small when singled out on their own, but together they definitely add up over the entire course of the game and just endear players more to this entire cast. So yeah, just imagine, or remember for those of you who have played base P5, if none of this was a thing, no wonder there was this huge common sentiment from like 2017 to 2020 that the Phantom Thieves, who were all just kiddos at the end of the day, never got to actually be kids, to just hang out and have fun and not always have to worry about these heavy real-world societal issues. Now, I personally didn't mind that there weren't more slice of life or time between friends moments in P5's original iteration, nor did I ever get the impression that the Phantom Thieves weren't friends, but I was definitely aware of this common and understandable critique from all the years lurking in the fandom. But well, about 4 years later, and in swoops Striker's road trip of all road trips to save the day. All the wholesome camping, traveling, and overall vacation time together you could ever want. Like, there was just so much, and I loved it all, and there's no way I can bring up all of it and not just go on a huge freaking tangent, so I have to limit myself to just a few. First of all, I'm just so glad the Phantom Thieves actually got to enjoy a fireworks festival for once. And the camping at the beach just really struck a nostalgic chord for me personally, made me recall the autumn beach bonfires from back in my high school days. I'll stop myself here for the sake of this video, but if you want to check out my playthrough highlights, they kinda say the rest. And okay, so this next part won't apply to everyone. Actually, it probably won't apply to most overseas Persona fans following 2017, but I think a convoluting factor was how this was the follow-up mainline entry to Persona 4. And I'd like to add some context that despite Persona 3 being a huge success and a lifeline for Atlus, Persona 4 was the entry that really started drawing eyes to the series. Comparatively to P5, Persona 4 just has so many pure slice-of-life friendship scenes involving the entire Inaba group, and the vast majority of them aren't overshadowed by the main plot either. Persona 4 Golden had even more scenes like this, which just further added to P4's direct shows of closeness, intimacy, and bonding among the party. So perhaps there was this expectation from existing fans that P5 would be more like that. Now, given the nature of P4's setting and narrative, it was more naturally able to accomplish something like this, since in comparison, the sheer scope of Persona 5's themes and the number of antagonists it wanted to get to, as well as just the more serious tone overall, just made it more difficult, I think, to balance screen time for everyone. I have a bit more to say about this later in the video, but the main takeaway I'm trying to get at in this section is what we actually got in P5 was little to no downtime to get a better feel for the Thieves' dynamic with each other, as well as their individual quirks. On that note, another thing Strikers did really well is the addition of NPC dialogue opportunities with all of our party members. Ones that constantly updated and changed from city to city throughout each arc. Very Trails-esque in this regard, and something I really enjoy. It just gave us more insight into the thoughts, likes, and personalities of each respective PT, and considering everything I already covered regarding royal changes to base P5, I feel this extra characterization from these, albeit optional, Strikers NPC lines can be unintentionally underappreciated by royal-only players. P5R had the Thieves' Den, and even previous games like Persona 3 had the consistently updating dialogue in the dorms, and P4 Golden had the optional night hangout scenes. Meanwhile, there just wasn't any equivalent to any of these things in base Persona 5. But I think we spent enough time on this point, so let's move on to a related one, starting with a question. So whether you played OG P5, Royal, or both, which characters would you say fell off the most in terms of plot relevance and overall screen time? Definitely these two, right? Or maybe you didn't even think of them because, well, taking a look at which videos get views within my P5 analyses series. Need I say more? So Strikers giving Yusuke and Haru a whole respective arc each was an awesome fix, especially given the genuine quality of the writing. Like, it wasn't just slapping on some Yusuke and Haru screen time just to make up for things without any effort put behind it, you know? For Haru in particular, something I feel people forget was just how difficult and uncommon it was to finish her confidant in the original game. I myself had to look up the rest of the ranks on YouTube after I finished my initial playthrough. It just felt like there wasn't enough time left in the year to do it unless you specifically prioritized proficiency, skill, and Haru, or strictly adhered to a max confidant guide. Meanwhile, I think more P5R players than not got to see all of her confidant thanks to the additional time at night to free up time during the day, along with the extra month added by the third semester. So I think Strikers is potentially even more meaningful when it comes to base P5 only players. Now I do get that sometimes Ryuji and An are also described as characters who fell off, but I don't know. I remember some pretty big moments from both of them in the final couple months of the game, regardless of what you actually think of those scenes. Hell, I'd argue that the controversial nature of them made Ryuji and An even more unforgettable. I have more to say about a certain scene in particular, as well as Ryuji in general, but first I want to talk about An's first arc in Strikers. I liked that her prominent role here echoed back to Persona 5's first arc, while also being a great progression of her character from that base narrative. And it was a breath of fresh air that the topic at hand stuck to her modeling gig via her peerage with Atlus, yet didn't devolve into some huge hyperfixation on their physical appearance. Like, it goes without saying that appearance is important in modeling. I just appreciated how the focus was more on Alice and An's internal and personal reasons to succeed in the industry, a lens that was relegated only to An's optional social link and nowhere in original P5's main story. But now let's move on to Ryuji. I'm certain all of us thanked Strikers for finally letting Ryuji say fuck. Like, we fucking did it, guys. Hashtag Ryuji for real got to say fuck. Though hold on, something I think goes super overlooked in that same scene is how it also confirms that Ryuji and Mona are indeed friends. Like, the Strikers writers clearly know how much hate they got during the Okamura arc, so here? For a second, you thought he was gonna go off on him again, huh? Well, psych, Mona sides with Ryuji and they destroy the crappy AI together. So I highly encourage you check out my Mona and Ryuji analyses, but especially the Mona one for more insight into why this Striker scene is so fulfilling to us fans who really dissect the nitty-gritty character dynamics that I tend to like to do. But speaking of those video shills, I also want to thank my patrons and channel members. You guys know my progress is always slow going due to my condition, so I truly thank you for your patience and for supporting me like this. I'm always beyond grateful, guys. Now back to the video. Well, as much as I adore Strikers, I'd be completely remiss not to call out Atlus for the one scene in the game that we did not ask for. Yes, the hot spring scene. Guys, seriously, there must be some higher up at Atlus who forces some kind of hot spring quota. If not that, a "we gotta beat up the guys, haha, so funny" quota. This is my own stupid headcanon, but I can't help but wonder if Atlus just sorta hastily threw in the "let's beat up Ryuji" thing in P5 after they realized, oh crap, the thieves never went to a hot springs together in this game. We have to add the beat up scene somewhere. Now, trust me guys, I've been in the anime and JRPG sphere for over 20 years, and I'm also of Japanese heritage, so I'm well aware this is a common cultural trope. If you find it funny, good for you, I guess, but to me, it just seems so out of place for P5 in particular, given its overall serious tone and message, and the fact that Ryuji is an assault survivor a la Kamoshida. So it's just, this kind of levity seems unnecessary. I can't fault the girl characters themselves at this point, because again, ever since Persona 3, this feels like it's just some kind of quota to the writing team. But I digress. The hot spring is just 2 meh minutes out of a 50+ hour game, and the following arc is sheer brilliance. So since we're on this topic, let's talk about Makoto. I appreciate how the fan favorites and heavy plot relevant characters in P5, aka her and Futaba, were given more of a backseat in Strikers without making them feel irrelevant, or like it was only for the sake of letting the neglected characters stand out more. Even in instances where someone like Makoto got a prominent role, like in the Akane and Zen arc, I just love how the new characters were allowed to shine on their own merits without Makoto overshadowing them. Same with Sophie in general, so yeah, credit where credit is due, Strikers. This team did a fantastic job at balancing everyone's, both the old and new characters, narrative presence and importance, which is kinda a cool answer to base P5's take in and of itself. But with that, let's transition to the third major reason why I view Strikers as the perfect sequel, which is how it leans into the backstories of all the jail rulers. We just get to learn more about how these antagonists came to be this way via flashbacks that dive into their circumstances. The lock-keep scenes in particular humanized each respective antagonist to a far greater extent than what we got for Persona 5's palace rulers. In fact, we learned nearly nothing personal about the latter individuals, even for the ones who are directly tied to our party members like Madarame, Okumura, and Shido. Now, certainly there's always gonna be players who don't want antagonists with quote-unquote sob stories, but from what I've noticed at least, there's a sizable, if not even larger group of people that likes learning relevant background context. Though to be fair, I'll always stand by the take that Persona 5's tone and overall goals didn't need sympathetic villains. The palace rulers were meant to be representatives of wider systemic injustices and issues in Japan, and not necessarily exist separately as fleshed out characters. In other words, I think it may have actually taken away from the base game's themes if these guys were given more of the Strikers treatment. Though to anyone and everyone who tries to argue that these guys are cartoonishly evil, I'd just like to point you to my Palace Ruler video because every single one of these guys is based on some real-life person and a wider systemic problem. Now, this isn't to say I 100% believe the kinds of people the Palace Rulers represent don't have some kind of trauma in their lives, even something like social ridicule or exceedingly high expectations by parents or something, to just name some examples, you know. To return to that interview with the Strikers team, producer Daisuke Kaneda said, quote, "I think everyone generally wants to live a noble life, but in that process we often encounter unexpected setbacks. Those might make us lose sight of who we are, and eventually we might reach the point where we can't recognize who we've become." And so, that was the basis for the game's jail rulers. That very sentiment is something I saw reflected in the communities I used to work with prior to my health problems. That the vast majority of people are still affected by past negative experiences and, for better or for worse, are just doing what they think is best with the tools life has given them. Though please don't get me wrong here, while we can have empathy, trauma never excuses nor justifies exploiting and abusing others in turn. So on that note, I think this intent on crafting P5's original villains as representations of larger macro-level issues is further upheld in Royal, and how it apparently scrapped ideas of will seeds including flashbacks of certain characters. In other words, the decision to ultimately go ahead without these essentially confirmed, at least to me, that the palace rulers were designed to serve as straightforward faces of corruption. But at the same time, I think P5R also clearly wanted to satisfy players who did wish for more backstory, and so, cue Royal's lock-keep flashback equivalents for Maruki within his own palace. Even just zooming out and looking at the bigger picture of Royal, you can see the team including more that put the player in certain antagonists and/or characters' shoes. Like properly spelling out Akechi's backstory via the new confidant, for instance, or Maruki's therapy sessions, if they can even be called that, technically giving some more personal insight into each Phantom Thief. Characterization which potentially may have made Striker's approach not as novel coming straight off of Royal. But that brings me to my final main argument. So I know I kept bringing up how Strikers and Royal were developed at the same time all throughout the video. However, it's more than likely that P5S also had this upgraded P5 in mind, as in each team probably didn't know much detail about the other respective project, but still likely knew the gist of all the changes. I can only speculate, but this is why a part of me believes Zenkichi is a follow-up not just to OG P5, but also Royal's additions. But I get that's just a lot of words, so what do I actually mean by this? Well, first off, you know how in P3 and P4 the vast majority of our social links are with other high schoolers? Like, sure, there were adults here and there, but it's not until P5's confidants where they make up like half of the entire list. Which makes sense given how 1. Joker is ostracized at school due to his criminal background, and 2. Many of the confidant perks could realistically only be offered by working adults. But anyways, this brings me to the fantastic fan-made Adult Confidant AU, and all credits to the artist ScruffyTurtles. I remember this being really popular online back in the first couple years of P5's global release. And while it does focus on recreating the adults as teenagers, I think the sheer popularity of this work reflects how well received the older confidants were by the general fan base. Building off of that, I recall seeing quite a number of posts citing Sae as the biggest missed opportunity of an adult character awakening to a persona since the pre-Hashino era. Speaking of, there were plenty of connections and comparisons that were being made to Persona 2, even by Atlus themselves, though to be fair, I haven't actually played the Persona 2 duology myself yet. Well, basically, what I'm getting at here is that with base Persona 5's release, it seemed that more than ever, fans were hoping to have adult party members again. Now, that brings me to Royal and Maruki. So here we actually got our first adult Persona user of the P5 era. I get that the underlying sentiment for this popular fan request is that it's pretty natural for people to like characters they can relate to, and one big factor in that is being of similar age. Now, NGL, I just want to throw this out there, I personally find it kinda sad when people can no longer empathize with high schoolers, and it's not like very adult stories and serious topics can't be explored via teenage characters. Like, I don't know, solidarity among many age groups and other demographics has always been a very important concept to me, but I digress. I already tangent a lot. So, to return to Maruki, while it was absolute hype to finally have a working age adult Persona user, Royal still left the fans without one who actually joins as a party member. But that's where Strikers comes in. At last, P5S answered the cries of so many adult players, giving them a party member they could more naturally relate to, and on top of that, one who was actually relevant for the entire game, as in, even though the awakening scene didn't happen until later, Zen was still clearly a vital part of the narrative throughout Strikers, and his availability in gameplay was substantial. Like the entire last 35% of Strikers and not only for the final dungeon or something. But with all that said about Zenkichi, I just want to shield this little reminder again. For those of you who have been playing P5 Tactica, I am planning a companion video to this one eventually. It'll be on why I can't help but overthink how P5T is Atlus's meta answer to P5R. Similarly to how P5S was to the OG Persona 5. But there you have it. Atlus does listen, guys. Well, they did for Strikers at the very least. But now I want to hear from you. Did my points make sense? Which of the 4 do you agree with most? Or just why do you think Strikers was so great? Or not? Especially if it's something that I didn't bring up, let me know in the comments. Also, please like and subscribe, it truly helps with the algorithm. And finally, I want to thank all my patrons and channel members for all their support, especially my special Fusion supporters, Big Klingy, Sam Bezjak, Francesco Santoyo Rego, M. Meownalin, Platinum Rose, Malcolm Lowry, Unholy Biscuit, Peter Shepard, and Andy.